right, hello, good morning. So yesterday we started reflecting on, well, I started reflecting on like what I like about React, what I don't like about React, what I like about Solid, what I don't like about Solid. And to kind of reiterate that, the thing I like about React is that if you have a component, you have this function, right? And this function returns a description of the UI you want to display for that component. Simple mental model. It's beautiful. You can discuss like if you prefer a templating language or you're okay with JSX. That's a different story. But just the mental model of every time this function is called, at the position of this component, what you return is what is going to be displayed on the screen. So if I were to have something dynamic here, like props.count, whenever those props change, this function is going to run again. We're going to return a new value, and then React is going to reconcile the differences. And the way React works is like it kind of produces the new tree from the position of this component, and then it does like a diff, and by default it diffs like everything. Okay, cool. So this is great. Where React starts like breaking the mental model is when you do things like this. Count set count use state 0. At this point you're breaking the mental model, because even though it makes a lot of sense for this function to be called again and again, when you're just returning, like it's a pure function using props, it's not a pure function anymore. And now you have this use state that's being called again and again. And then the first time it's called, it's gonna initialize the use state. But the next time it's called, nothing's actually gonna happen. And then you have things like use effect, you have the dependency arrays, like state management becomes such a mental burden with React because of this super simple pure function model of calling the function again and then updating the UI. Okay. And then it's Solid. So Solid has this other approach where the function isn't called again and again. It's called once. So again, you might have some props here. And you might do something like this. And the function is called once, and then like that, and then that's the question, like how does it keep up to date? And there's nothing in this code that indicates how this is being kept up to date, right? It doesn't reflect the reactivity in any way. So Solid has a compiler, and in that compiler, it will actually, so if something is calling app here, like count, some count, what happens with the compiler is that it's gonna change these this app, these props into like an object of, oh, come on. It's gonna change that. I can zoom in a little bit more even. Let's see, let's put this down. It's gonna compile that into something like get count, return some count. That's what actually happens under the hood. So when you point to props.count here, you're actually pointing to this. But that's not all that happens. It also changes this thing. So props.count actually becomes this with the compiler. So this is how the reactivity actually happens. It's because the prop is passed as a getter, and the reference to props.count is actually put into a function. And this bothers me. Like if you accept this, it's a much like it's it's harsh to say ignorance is bliss, but I think it's like a productive decision, right? It's a productive decision to accept that this is just how it works. You don't really want to think about the underlying thing when you're just building your freaking app. But for me, this is like I can't help myself. It's just staring at me constantly. So then I was thinking, is there maybe a way to do what Solid does, which is to have a simple model of creating a component using a function, returning once, and then highlight the reactivity, like what are the actual reactive parts, and in doing so, simplifying everything. So where should I start? Okay, and a final note on that is that with Solid, you have a much cleaner state management because this function will never be called again, right? So when you do something like count, set count, create signal, like all of this makes sense, right? You have this single scope for a component, it runs once, you return the UI with its reactive definition, right? But everything above that is just like, it's a constructor if you're thinking about a class. So how could you gain that benefit from Solid, but not having to do special components for loops and all of this, and don't need a compiler to hide the complexity of the reactiveness? So I was thinking about this, and I put Claude to the test yesterday to create a proof of concept of this. Like, this is the kind of thing you really have to manually implement to optimize and everything. But it's crazy how quickly it got through it, and also I'm kind of pumped about this. Anyways, so let's just play around with it. So first of all, we have our app here, Hello World, that works as normal. And then what you do when you want to do some state is that you create state. So there is no single value state. You always have to define an object. And the reason you do this is because of what we discussed yesterday. Like, you have to unwrap, like you have to track access to state. And you can do that by having two primitives, like create signal and create store, where create signal, you have to call the value to track it. But with create store, you track it by store access, basically. But here you only have one thing. And if I want to, let's create some more UI here. Oh, come on. Hello world. The account is, and if you want to do something reactive, you actually insert a function. And you might say now, like, oh no, why can't I just do this, right? But this is the thing, like, this function runs once, and if you do this, you're gonna return the count at its initial state, right? There's nothing reactive there. So you use a function. So you clearly see this is the reactive piece of the code. This is where it's gonna update in the DOM whenever the count changes, like it's up in your face. Increase. And then if you want to click it, you just say state count ++. Okay, hopefully this works now. Yeah, it does. And we can look at the source here. No, not the source, sorry. Well, we can look at the source. So unlike Solid, which has its own compiler, like it doesn't even do like the JSX interface. It has its own way of compiling or transpiling. This just uses, so there's no like special plugin for this. You just have to have JSX, and then it produces that JSX. But the difference is that it's not a virtual DOM. It's not keeping this for reference. It's just using this to understand, okay, how do I like translate these instructions into DOM operations? That's all it does. And then when we look at the actual source here, what's interesting here is that I didn't know about this. Like, as I said, I just threw this at Claude. And what's interesting is that Claude decided to go with this strategy where you have these anchor tags. And first I was like, no, that's not clean. But then Claude explained to me that this is very efficient, especially since we don't have a virtual DOM. And what's nice is that you can actually see in your HTML where the reactivity actually is. So that's pretty cool. I wonder if this actually, does this H4 update because it replaces it? Yeah, there's probably tons of bugs in this, but yeah, I wonder if it replaces it. Oh, we can actually check that. Can I store this as a global variable? Store as global variable. Nice. And then I increase. And then store as global variable. temp1 equals temp2. Yeah, it's the same element. Cool. Anyways, so that's an interesting thing. And like this doesn't cost anything, right? In terms of performance and memory and stuff. It's incredibly efficient. Anyways, so what's interesting is how we deal with control flow. Because in Solid, it was chosen to create these special components. But this is what I love about React, is that you don't have these special components. Like the thing that completely threw me off is like how does it actually track updates with for example? So with for, you have like each to-dos, and then you have like this thing where you actually like type out the UI, and then the to-do is already unwrapped. So this is the actual array, but it's not, you can't do this, unlike with an accessor, like where you, that's wrong. Let me show you. So if you have show when, so you have this, and then here you have like, here you can do this. So to-do's length more than 5. I am pretty confident about this, but here you can't do this. So here you like have a reference to something, and the only reason this works is because to-do's is an array. And then when you're in here, let's see. I'm trying to get some good examples here. So anyways, when you're in here, the to-do is actually unwrapped, but the index, that's an accessor. So you have to call index, but you don't have to call to-do. And the same goes for these other control flows, where here you suddenly get the accessor value. You don't get the actual value. And it's very confusing to me. So you're kind of juggling like these different ways of expressing observation. Okay. But here, you would rather do something like, so let's say I want to show state.count for every thing. Is that even or odd? Something like that. I think this is gonna work. Let's see. Oh, let's put it in a div. Oh, come on. Sorry. Oh, it's the opposite of the even. Okay, so here, odd, even, odd, even. So you're just putting the expression in the same concept. So whatever you return from this, and it's funny because it's very much like, let's see, let's find what Adam showed me. And it's very interesting because Ryan has been the Solid.js maintainer or creator and maintainer. He was writing this article about this, which is kind of like a new templating kind of thing. But you don't need this. Like, right? Why can't you just use a function like this? And then I can do this more like, so if return even. So you have like the full power of JavaScript here. And the only thing we're doing is that we're stating that when you use a function, that becomes an observation scope, right? And this is true for everything. If I have like a list of to-dos, let's create the type here. Completed. I have a feeling like there's something I'm missing or something. Or maybe this is just, it's hard to dissect the complexity of these two solutions and what like a good middle ground would actually be. Yeah, I might write an article about this instead. Anyways, let's explore it. So we have to-dos here. So what if I wanted like a, yeah, let's just continue building on this. Let's just do like a HR thing. And let's say that we have a list, and then we're gonna do dynamically, we're gonna point to to-dos, and we have to do, and it's just JavaScript, right? And then we have index, and we're just gonna use the index as key. So I'm using, oh, I thought this was actually typed. Oh, is it because it's a number? It might be. You'll have to excuse my, oh, that's interesting. Okay, hopefully this still works. Or you know what, let's just give it an ID, sorry. This is very much oh, I guess it doesn't matter then. Okay, let's let's do the index. Sorry. So so the reason you use a key here, so Solid doesn't require you to use a key. I think you can still do it, but it does some internal checks in the array to figure out like what's actually changed here. But coming from React, like adding a key for me just makes sense. It just says that this node belongs to this data, right? And the cool thing about observation versus reconciliation is that with reconciliation, when it renders out an update to an array, it needs to build out the whole array, like build up the whole virtual DOM for that array. And then it needs to go and compare, right? What actually changed here. But when you have observation like this, even though we're doing this, it's actually able to just look at the description that you return from this. So if this was a component, it wouldn't actually unwrap the component. It would just be a reference to a component, right? But you would pass a key on that component. But the fact is that it doesn't care about the props passed into the component because everything's reactive. So it only cares about the key. And that means if you have like 1,000 list components and you add something, the only thing it needs to figure out is what keys do I already have and what's being added or removed. That's the only thing it needs to do. And then it just unmounts or mounts the specific component in the specific position. That's all it needs to do, as opposed to like generating this full virtual DOM and start like comparing everything. It's incredibly efficient. So index to do dot description. Yeah, so now the question is, do we want this description to be reactive, right? So the right way to do this is this, if you want to actually update changes from it. And now we're gonna like start discussing, like, it feels kind of bloated, right? That you're inlining all of these functions, and we're gonna talk about that. But let's see if we can get this running first. Add to do, on click. State to do's push. Completed false description. Mip map. Let's see. Yeah, and it adds the to do like that. And then I guess we could try to like button remove, on click. Let's see. Oh yeah, you know what? Now I'm seeing an issue. So this index, yeah. Oh, this is gonna be interesting. Yeah, now I understand why this is an accessor. It's because, oh, that's interesting. Anyways, I'm gonna explain it. So we can say state to do splice. What is it? Index 1, something like that. Yeah, cool. Now a problem is if I change the order of these components or this list, right? So let's imagine I created 2 items in the list, and one of them has index 0, the other one has index 1. And then I flip them, right? That means that I'm actually not going to remount the component. I'm just going to look at the description. I'm going to check the key, and I'm going to just flip them in the DOM, like literally the DOM nodes. The problem now is this index doesn't reflect, isn't the correct one anymore. Which is why Solid is doing this, so that you always get like the correct index. That's a tricky one. I need to think about that one. Yeah, that's so interesting. Anyways, we can talk more about that. I just want to go through everything I play with. So the point is that this is like inline, even though like it does describe the exact like reactive parts and everything. Like it has some of these things. So how do you fix that? And one thing is doing something like this or something like this. But for example, for an on click, you could argue that this is something you would want to do regardless, like on add to do. So you can use, for example, the thing I like to do. Oops. So you can add just functions for it. And the same, and you can do exactly the same for this, right? So if I wanted to say render to do's, for example, function render to do's. Oh, did I do something? There we go. So this would of course work exactly the same, right? So you can clean up the UI a ton. Or of course, in this case, maybe I wanted to point to state to do's map, and then I would map to a component instead of like inlining this. But that is of course completely up to you. And here as well, it will be like render even odd. And render is just like a pattern I'm using now. But you might want to do something else. The point being that these are just functions where you use normal JavaScript, normal control flow, and you just inline them like you do with onClicks, right? Cool. And again, the point here is that it's incredibly efficient, like from the perspective of performance. Like this might even be more efficient than Solid itself. It would be fun to like optimize the code and run some benchmarks on it. But theoretically, it can be even faster than Solid, I think, or at least as fast. And then you have a very clear concept of how you create reactivity in the returned UI. Oh, I completely forgot. So it isn't only about reactivity here, right? You might also have reactivity in your attributes or in your attributes. So for example, here I can do style. Let's see. So I can say color red, right? Like this. So that works. But I can make just like any part of the text of an element can have a dynamic part to it. Any attribute can also be dynamic. So if I do this, this is now like reactive. So currently it just shows red, of course. Like this. But if I were to go in here, and if I like increase, nothing really happens. But if I do the same here, like state.count %2 red blue, now this is suddenly dynamic as well. And the point is that it only updates the style property. And this, like the DOM operations themselves aren't more efficient, right? This is what React is just as efficient as. But it's the amount of work it needs to do to figure out that DOM operation. In this case, literally this scope is bound to the style property on the DOM element. And whenever it runs, it just sets a new style property, right? It's such a simple mental model. It's the same here. This scope is literally bound to the text node representing this area. And whenever it changes, it sets the text value on that DOM node. Literally. And that mental model, to me, makes a shit ton of sense. And arrow functions is functions is a really great way to express dynamic content. Like that is the essence of a function, is to do something dynamically. And you have the same for like I added class has the same thing. And here you can also do like, whatever, some class. Oh, sorry. And then that can be dynamic as well. Sorry. Yeah, so that's really cool that you can do this. Okay. So what was I thinking about now? Was I going to conclude with anything? Oh, I was going to do something and then I forgot. because I wanted to show this part. Yeah, I guess one thing, yeah, so maybe we should just talk about like these challenges. So another thing is, what about props passing, right? What if you want this count to be, what if you want that count to be a component? Props. Yeah, so how do you do that? How do you make that reactive? And it would follow the exact same pattern. It's, where's the count? Here's the count. Like if you want that count to be a reactive prop, you pass a function. And then you say props.count here. It should work the same. Yeah. So this is like, that's the mental model. It's like you have these functions that become reactive scopes when you apply them to your DOM, your UI description. That being a child, that being an attribute, or if you're passing, well, a prop is just really a handover to some nested UI description. But yeah, to me, this makes a lot of sense. It's a much clearer mental model, I think. And we're kind of wrapping up all of this like, yeah, normal JavaScript control flow. It's highly optimized and all of this. But we still have this list thing. Yeah, this is interesting. Because as I mentioned, just to track back, it's like if I render out 2 elements here, and then I flip them, the scope that created those elements stays the same, right? That's the efficiency. But now this index reference isn't correct anymore. And it's a problem because when you map over something, this index is just a value. And if you consume it, it's not going to work. So now we're getting into like acceptance territory again. So everything we've discussed up until now is more about like accepting how you express dynamic UIs. Like, or one perspective is like, what does the syntax look like? And then another thing is like, what does the magic look like? There is no magic here, right? That's the whole point. So we're kind of removed having to accept magic. But if there was a library like this, you would have to accept that you can't confidently consume this index. Yeah, and what could also happen is like the key here could be the same. So if you remove one thing and add something, you could risk having, yeah, so like if you have 2, so index 0, 1, you remove 0, the index is still 1 on the first one, you add something and it will also get index 1. So you have 2 that with the same index. Yeah, but I think this is kind of the thing, right? So it's still in the acceptance territory, But the point is, if you don't have a strong reference to the data you're consuming, you shouldn't use a key. Well, you might still want to use the index. Yeah, but that's fine, right? Yeah, but this is the thing. So if you don't use a key, so if you use a key, it means you also have a strong reference to the data in that array, or in that item of the array, right? Which means that that's the reference you use. While if you don't have a strong reference, maybe I just have a list of strings, then you can use index, but you don't use a key. Because what's going to happen then is that it's less optimal. It's going to, whenever the array changes, it's just going to replace the complete DOM section. Like it's kind of like re-rendering everything, which is true for other solutions as well, as far as I know. Anyways, so to kind of conclude, if you don't have a strong reference, don't key it, and you can use index if you want to do that. But if you do have a strong reference, like a todo.id, and you use that as a key, you need to use that strong reference. So this would be like state to-dos index of to-do, for example. You can't use the index. But this is acceptance territory. Or a caveat. Yeah, caveat is, I guess, is the word for this stuff. But I think that's acceptable. But it is, yeah. Well, you could actually detect it in development. Like we know if you're using 2 arguments here. And if you have a key, you could get a warning like you're using index with a strong reference. You shouldn't do that kind of thing. But yeah, it's interesting. Anyways, yeah, and the good thing here is like you can still do count, right? It's perfectly fine to the structure, which it isn't in Solid because of the magic happening. And then you can argue like, oh, but then I have to, like, the count isn't just a number, it's like number, right? Yeah, it is, but it's a reactive number, and this is how you express reactive values. Yeah, I think that's it. That was my explorations. I'm like, this is the first time I've so many times I've tried doing this. I even tried to write my own like virtual DOM library at the time, but I never had like this perspective of seeing Solid like doing the thing that makes the most sense to me in terms of like how the runtime of keeping the UI up to date should work. Like calling the component function once, return the UI description with dynamic parts to it. That makes so much more sense to me. But then, as I said, there is a lot of caveats to Solid. Not a lot. There are caveats to Solid, and it's like, for me, screaming in my face for every single piece of code I write. But yeah, and then it's very interesting, like how Ryan is also reflecting on like, I don't like these 4 components and these show components and switch components. Why can't we just use normal control flow? But again, it's like magic here. It's very complex to build something like this. So why not just use plain functions? I must be missing something. Ryan is a smart dude with a shit ton of experience, but he's also not biased. Well, I guess the term is biased by like being so dug deep into Solid. It's a very common thing is that you it's harder to be like look outside the box when you're the first person to share that experience. So yeah, maybe what would be cool is to convert this proof of concept into something that has a bit more description and stuff, and then write an article that brings up the actual like challenges, reference this article as a way to think about it in a different way. Yeah, I think that's going to be the conclusion. I have to jump off anyways. I have to get some work done. Yeah, because like I would love to build like a UI library, but it would have to be something, because like Solid and all Svelte and all of these libraries, they are doing server-side rendering. I never built applications like that. So I would just, if I were to do this, it would be like a SPA single page application UI framework, which doesn't do server-side rendering or any of that stuff. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I'm going to try to write up that article first, and then we'll see what happens with this. Thanks for following along, and then bye-bye.